Hello and welcome to London's Calling 2021. Welcome to my session. My name's Damien and I'd like to introduce you to my session today. Could you be a CTA judge? During the session, I will provide an introduction to the Salesforce CTA program, and I'll be giving you, the viewers, an opportunity to review some of the CTA Review Board solution artifacts and act as though you were a judge in a review board panel evaluating those. I'd just like to say a quick thank you to our sponsors who are called out at the top of the slide, top right-hand side. Without their generous sponsorship and support, this event would not be possible. A quick introduction from myself about me. So my name is Damien Owen. I'm a Salesforce technical architect in Deloitte Digital in the UK. I've been working in technology consulting for around 17 years. 12 of those have been in the Salesforce ecosystem. I work in financial services, banking and capital markets. So that includes things like retail banking, commercial banking, investment banking, private equity, asset management, and fund managers. And I'm an engineering and architecture leader in Deloitte Digital UK as well. And across EMEA, that means I provide career development, support, coaching, mentoring for engineers and architects, and all those interested in pursuing a career in the Salesforce ecosystem. A technical career, and that can be anything from developers just starting their career at the very beginning of their journey, all the way through and up to those senior engineers and architects and those that are working towards their certified technical architect status. And in fact, at the moment, I'm leading a cohort of folks that we've been working towards technical architects for about 12 to 18 months now, running sessions twice weekly in multiple formats. I hold a number of certifications myself in the Salesforce space, including application and system architect, and I will be sitting my CTA Review Board panel later this year myself in the summer of 2021. So who's this session for? Well, it's for anybody who is new to the CTA concept and would like to understand more about the Certified Technical Architect qualification. Also, anybody who's already on that journey would maybe just like a bit of refresher or a top-up, a reminder on some of the key concepts and principles. Okay, what are we going to cover today? Firstly, I'll talk a little bit around the background of the Certified Technical Architect exam, what it takes to become one and the kind of things you need to do and the prerequisites. I'll then spend a little bit of time talking about the core artifacts. So they're the things that we have to produce as an architect as part of an architecture review board. And then lastly, we'll play a bit of a game. So I will bring up some real life examples from mock review boards, and I will challenge you to identify the mistakes or the things that have been missed in those. Just a little bit of a warning. This was intended to be an interactive session in which I would encourage the crowd or the audience to get involved. Given this is pre-recorded and you're either watching this live on the day or on YouTube, pause the video if you can and take a moment to look at the artifacts. If you don't have the opportunity to pause, take a quick look, and then if you want to, after I've covered the answers, you can come back to them when you watch them in your own time and study them a little more closely. All right. So first things first, what is the Certified Technical Architect in the Salesforce ecosystem? And what does it take to achieve that? So it's the highest and most coveted technical certification in the Salesforce ecosystem, as you can see represented at the top of the pyramid on the slide. And there are a number of things that you typically have to do to achieve it. First of all, it's common to have around at least 8 years experience working on Salesforce delivery projects and implementations. And they can be any kind of role, whether it's developer, business analyst, tester, delivery lead, architect. Typically, some of that time will be spent designing solutions and advising teams and leading teams. And it's typically a minimum of 8 years experience. There are certainly people who've passed the certification with fewer than 8 years experience. That's definitely the case. And there are a lot of people, such as myself, who are taking certification with many more than 8 years experience. So that's just a guide, a representation, but not a hard and fast rule. There are multiple prerequisite certifications to take the Certified Technical Architecture Review Board. And so we can see those on the pyramid there. So on the left-hand side, there's the application architecture prerequisites. So these are a number of designer specialist certifications. For example, there are the basics for building solutions on the platform, like the app builder and platform developer one. And then there are the ones focused on certain architecture domains, such as sharing and visibility and data architecture. These are specific designer certifications, and once you've achieved all of these 4 prerequisites, then you automatically achieve the Certified Application Architect certification. And you can look at the application architect as what happens inside of Salesforce, the things you need to do to build an application as an architect. Then on the right-hand side of the pyramid, we have the System Architect certification. And this is made up of, again, 4 prerequisites. You'll notice that Platform Developer 1 is replicated or duplicated. It's the same exam, so you don't have to take it again, but you do need it. And then we have Integration Architecture Designer, which is focused on how do I integrate Salesforce into other systems and platforms? What patterns do I use? What APIs? How do I secure those? Then we've got Identity Access Management, which is, I think everybody who's taken it can agree, is notorious for being the toughest of the bunch. And that's focused on how do I secure user access to Salesforce? How do I provision users? How do I manage their passwords and single sign-on? And how do I integrate that to other enterprise identity platforms such as ADFS? And lastly, we have the Development and Deployment Lifecycle Designer. So this is focused on, if I'm building a solution on the Salesforce platform, what environment management do I need? What sandboxes? What build automation tooling, CI/CD, code management, repositories, and other developer tools? And how do I pull all of those together to create a process that allows me to build quality, robust, tested, and reliable solutions that I can put into a production environment with confidence? All right, so they're the prerequisite certifications, and you need to be application and system architect qualified before you're allowed to take the Certified Technical Architect exam. Now, I should point out that whilst these are prerequisites, these aren't the only things, and just because you have those doesn't necessarily mean that you're immediately ready to take the Technical Architect certification. There are a number of other things that typically you would have done, and these are the other points. So the third one is typically around 12 months focused study, and so that's, making a commitment. I'm going to take the Certified Technical Architect exam, and I'm going to focus study, and that can be anything from 5 hours per week to 20 hours per week over kind of maybe between 6 months to 18 months, can be more, depending on what approach you use and how much time you can carve out for that around your other commitments. But it's focused study intended to fill the specific gaps that you may have in your knowledge and build a broad base of deep knowledge in the areas that you need. And we'll cover some more of the curriculum later on. Point number 4 is mock review boards. So we talk about the Certified Technical Architect Review Board, which is the actual review board you take, and we will talk about the structure of that. But before you take your actual one, it's a very good idea and highly recommended to take multiple mock review boards, so simulations with colleagues or other peers or other Certified Technical Architects, so you can get familiar with the format and the conditions and the way in which you have to deliver. We'll talk more about those, but they're a critical element to your preparation. We say typically 3 to 5 mock review boards as a minimum is common. There are some people, quite a lot, who've taken many more as part of their preparation. Point number 5 is what's called the 601 CTA workshop, and this is a formal offering from Salesforce. So it was traditionally a 2-day workshop in a classroom environment with a qualified instructor from Salesforce who would spend 2 days taking you through all of the topics and what you need to understand and the things that you need to cover in detail to understand how to be a Certified Technical Architect, really kind of set you up for success. Since we've been in lockdown and classroom-based sessions aren't possible, these have moved to a virtual format. And as I understand, they're 2 half-day sessions at the moment. Highly recommend these, especially if you're new to the certification. They will give you a good understanding of the full breadth of the syllabus and where you need to focus your attention and help you identify your learning areas and get some direct feedback and be able to ask questions to some experts from Salesforce. Number 6 is what's called the 602, the CTA Diagnostic. Now, this is a half-day focus session, again, an offering from Salesforce with a Certified Technical Architect. the way this works, you have a mock scenario, a short scenario, maybe 5 or 6 pages. You have 1 hour to read that and prepare some artifacts that certified technical architects would prepare. And then you have half an hour to present those to the architect in a one-to-one fashion. And then they will spend half an hour giving you feedback and some direction. And then they will, after the session, give you formal written feedback against each of the domains in terms of where they think you are in terms of knowledge and experience and readiness. It's often called a readiness check for the CTA Review Board. And they will give you a target to say, maybe in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, we think you will be ready. 602 is relatively new. I think it was running in pilot for a while, maybe a year. Now it's formally available. I took one last October. Can definitely recommend it as part of your whole CTA journey. And I think Salesforce have said that if you get a good feedback or good recommendations from your 602, it's a very strong indicator to how ready you are to take your actual review board exam. All right. Okay. The last point, and by no means the least, is the actual final review board. We will talk more about this in detail in the actual structure, but this is the thing that you need to actually pass to achieve the certified technical architect. So all of the preparation, everything you do up until that point is to prepare you for that. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment so you understand the format and the structure of that. Just a couple of other points that are worth mentioning that I haven't called out specifically on the list, but it's often important to identify study partners or people to work with or peers throughout your journey. It's often not best served as a kind of solo attempt or solo mission. So one option is, for example, to enroll to a formal program. So there's one, it's called Flow Republic, run by a chap called Seb Wagner, who's been doing these for a number of years now and highly regarded in the technical architect space. And that's a program that I think typically runs for 6 months and is very structured and rigorous, and has had a number of successful candidates and continues to do so. And that's one way to certainly to help you focus your study and really benefit from the experience of others. And I would just especially recommend that if you don't work in an organization that maybe has a CTA program similar to the one we have at Deloitte. And if you don't have that option, at least try and find some peers either in your organization or out in the ecosystem. There are lots of other people on a similar journey that you can find in the Trailblazer community who are willing to kind of be part of your journey and support you and expect some kind of reciprocity in terms of maybe supporting them at the same time. So just something to bear in mind. All right, so we talked about the curriculum. This is a view of the curriculum and the kind of topics that are included. I'm not going to go into them all in detail, but it gives you a sense of the breadth of topics that you need to cover and the things you need to think about. All of these topics that are on the wheel, you need to have a sense of what they are, what they mean, and how they apply in the context of a Salesforce solution. So as an architect, you need to have a view on all of these. The core sections include system landscape. They're all the technologies in the landscape of your solution, including Salesforce and other systems. They include your data model. We'll talk more about the data model artifact later, but that's effectively, how are you storing data in Salesforce? What objects do you use? How are they related? What are the capacity considerations and security considerations? Security more generally. So how are you securing your environment, both internally to make sure users can only do the things they're supposed to, and also externally, so how are you securing the APIs and interactions with the systems and making sure that only the people that need to have access to your platform will have access, and you will meet security needs and expectations of your organization or your industry or whatever it may be. And the last one that the last two that I'll talk to is the development lifecycle and the governance. So what are all the things you need around your project or your solution to build and develop that and allow a team to interact, whether it's developers, testers, users, things like user acceptance testing, data migration, all of the environments you're going to need and how you're going to manage all of that, because ultimately it's a software delivery program in an enterprise context. And lastly, actors and licenses. So who are the users that will use your system? What kind of licenses will they need and what considerations are there? You must have a foundation in all of these knowledge areas and you must be comfortable talking to them. Okay, moving on. We talked about the CTA Review Board. Let's just drill down that a little bit more and understand what the review board is made up of and how it works. So the actual review board is around a half-day exercise, slightly longer, and it's broken down into 3 main sections. And before I go into those, I will just explain. Historically, this was an in-person, so you would go to a venue, a Salesforce office or pre-arranged space, and you would spend the day doing this face-to-face. Since we've been in lockdown and those kinds of options aren't available, this has moved to a virtual format. Going forward, it's unclear if the virtual format will continue to remain available and the classroom-based option will come back, or the in-person option, or there'll be a mix of both. But for now, during COVID lockdown, it's a virtual format, and I'll try and explain some of the differences that presents. So the 3 sections of the review board. First of all is the case study solution preparation. This is a 3-hour window and by far the biggest part. So you will get a roughly 10-page case study scenario, and you will have 3 hours to read that, digest it, and prepare a solution proposal from the back of that. That solution proposal you'll present to a board of certified technical architects. You have 3 hours. In a virtual format, the way it works is you have remote access to a remote desktop via WebEx. That can be either Mac or Windows, depending on your preference. You'll have a PDF and a Word copy of the scenario, and you'll have access to Microsoft Office tools such as Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, so that you can prepare your solution proposal. You can also use pen and paper and then upload digital copies of those to present, and that's up to you which you prefer. And it's very much a style and preference. Some people prefer to produce all of their artifacts in PowerPoint, and some prefer to produce them on paper, and then some prefer a kind of hybrid approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the in-person presentations, obviously you had the luxury of being able to use things like flip charts and talk to those specifically, and you can use those on the virtual options. Some people have whiteboards behind them and point the webcam at them, and that's an option if you wish to use that. So after you've prepared your solution proposal and the artifacts, you then have 45 minutes to present those to the panel. The panel is made up of 3 certified technical architects, and they will sit and listen to your presentation. Now that's a 45-minute one-way dialogue. So there's no interaction at that point. This is simply you talking, presenting what you've created. The onus is very much on you to manage that time effectively. So it's very, very important that you get your points across concisely and quickly, and don't over-elaborate or give verbose explanations where they're not necessary. You have 45 minutes to get as much information across as possible and present your solution. So manage that time well. After the 45-minute presentation, there's then a 40-minute Q&A. So this is the judge's opportunity to ask you questions and for you to explain your answers. And these questions are very much the judges trying to fill in gaps or confirm areas that either weren't clear to them from your presentation, or maybe you didn't cover at all and they want to demonstrate that you understand. Now, Salesforce don't publish their marking criteria or exactly how they evaluate and judge, but the general consensus is there are a list of things they're looking to confirm that you understand and that you know, and they'll check those off as they see them during your presentation. And then the ones that they haven't been able to get confidence around, they will ask you and lead you into those areas with the Q&A and give you the opportunity to answer. So they won't tell you if you've given the answer they want or if they've satisfied a criteria. They will ask you questions, and it's up to you to share the information and give insight. But again, it's very much up to you to manage that time well and give concise, to the point, short answers. If you spend a lot of time going into unnecessary detail, you're going to eat up the Q&A time, which is the time that the judges really want to use to understand and to close the gaps that you may not have covered in your solution. So cannot emphasize that enough. Manage the time and use it effectively, and get used to giving short, precise answers. Very, very important. A couple of other points to mention. Because of the time pressure, the best way to prepare for these is literally by practicing them. So we talked about mock reviews before. And a mock review is just you kind of arranging to do these outside of the actual exam situation. So either with some colleagues or peers or other people, get a scenario, go through the preparation process, spend 45 minutes presenting it, and then go through the Q&A. Try and find people who are suitably qualified, other architects or the people who are working on the process, so they can give you feedback that's going to be similar and simulate an exam type situation. I would suggest, first of all, just start on working on how you prepare a solution and don't worry as much about the time element. So you will take more than 3 hours when you first start to prepare them. But then once you're comfortable with your style and how you're going to produce your artifacts, whether it's on paper, whether it's in PowerPoint, whether you're going to use Excel, and we'll talk about some of those options later, get comfortable with your style and then start to build on the time pressure and try and do that in a time box fashion, working up to the point where you can work within a 3-hour window when you feel that time pressure. It's definitely a skill to master, and a lot of people are comfortable doing this stuff without the time pressure. The time pressure has a whole new dimension, and you really need to practice it to get comfortable. So, moving on, some of the review board artifacts. Let's take a look at them. As I mentioned, you can go with a pen and paper approach, or you can go with a digital approach. There's no right or wrong. It comes purely down to style. Some people are very confident at producing artifacts in PowerPoint, and they enjoy the flexibility that it offers, being able to tweak and drag and drop and change. Others aren't comfortable and prefer to sketch on pen and paper, have a rough copy, and then when they're ready, draw a final copy quickly and use that. It's entirely up to you what you prefer. Try them all and see what works for you and see what you're comfortable with. Bear in mind, if you are going for the digital approach and you're using PowerPoint, when you're in the actual exam scenario, you're not controlling PowerPoint and Word and Excel on your local machine. It's on WebEx, on a remote machine, and the latency is quite painful, is the feedback that we've heard from many people who have sat this. So when you go through your mock reviews, if you think you're going to want to produce them digitally, try and simulate that scenario. So get somebody else with another machine, or have a second machine that's running WebEx and control that desktop remotely via yours. It's a bit painful to set up and requires a lot of kind of faffing around initially, but it's worth it to kind of build in the conditioning to be used to that latency and the pain that it introduces. Because of the time pressure, it really makes a difference. So let's have a look at some of the artifacts specifically. Here are the artifacts that are typically considered as part of a review board. There are others which I'm not going to mention, but these are the core ones. First of all is a system landscape. We'll have a look at some of those today. And as I mentioned earlier, this is Salesforce and the systems that are in your solution landscape that Salesforce will have to interact with, whether they're systems that you're recommending, systems that are in the scenario that you have to include, or systems in the scenario that you're even decommissioning. They all need to be on there. Data model. So this talks to the objects that you're going to store data in and how you're going to structure your data. We'll look at one of those. The role hierarchy. I think anybody who's worked in the Salesforce ecosystem for any amount of time is familiar with the role hierarchy and the criticality of its role, no pun intended, in a Salesforce solution. So we'll have a look at that and where that features. Licenses and products, or actors and licenses, it's often known. What are the licenses your solution will need? And for which user groups are you proposing those? Very important. 5 is governance and software development lifecycle. We talked about this one already. What environments are you going to use? How are you going to deploy things? How will you manage your code? Will you use Salesforce DX? What coding standards will you use? All the things that you need to demonstrate you've got a robust software development lifecycle. Number 6 is data migration. Almost always, every scenario that I've seen has some concept of a legacy system being migrated or some data being consolidated. You need to talk to that. You need to describe how that will happen, what the considerations are, what systems you will require, and what steps will be required in that process. All of these artifacts up until this point are generally standalone artifacts, and you can consider them compulsory in your solution review. Number 7 is risks and assumptions. This isn't always a standalone artifact. Often, this can be just woven into your other artifacts, or vocalized over the top if you wish. Some people choose to call them out in a separate slide, but you absolutely must talk to them. If you don't talk to risks and assumptions, you can pretty much guarantee in your Q&A, the judges are going to ask you about them. As a responsible architect, you need to be mindful of the risks of any given approach or decision and what risks they may pose, and more importantly, how you plan to address or mitigate those. Calling a risk out isn't good enough if you're not talking about what you're doing about it, what you propose to do. And assumptions, again, always call out your assumptions. If your solution makes certain assumptions because they're not clear in the documentation, call those out. And one tip I would give is, where it's not clear, assume complexity. Assume simplicity. So don't assume that your system has unnecessary complexity if you don't need to. You're just making the solution harder for yourself. So assume that it's as simple as the scenario will allow, and then design a solution for that. Integration catalog. This is not mandatory, but often some people like to include a list of their interfaces separately to complement the system landscape. This gives the opportunity to describe the logical integration and how data flows between them. And lastly, requirements. Again, this is not mandatory. What you do need to do is make sure that you address all of the requirements. These 10 pages of dialogue is basically made up of multiple requirements. You have to make sure you're addressing those. Some people prefer to highlight in the Word or the PDF document, whereas others will take those requirements from the Word document, paste them into Excel, and then address each requirement specifically one by one with a comment. So they're confident, and they use that to then navigate them through the scenario. Not mandatory, and it's very dependent on style and preference, but you absolutely need to address every requirement. So let's take a look at some of the artifacts and what they're made up of. First of all, system landscape. System landscape, as we talked about, contains Salesforce and all of the systems that you need to talk to. A few tips for the system landscape. First of all, you must not miss off any systems that you need to include in your solution. If they're mentioned in the case study, absolutely include them. If they're new systems that you're proposing or that need to be decommissioned, absolutely include them. If you miss one off, it's a big miss, and you're going to get called out on it. So make sure you include them, anything that's mentioned. If they're being decommissioned, like the example here, we put it in a red box and we show that it's being decommissioned. We call it out clearly. That also includes App Exchange. So any App Exchange components or products that you're using, call them out. So you'll see here, this conga sign is mentioned. Any App Exchange components, call them out because they're part of your system landscape. Another common one is data warehouse. Almost all solutions will have some form of analytics. So don't assume that an analytics tool is enough. Often a data warehouse is a critical component to that. Not always, but often. It's very important to label where necessary. So one common area you always need to label is the connections between the systems you'll see. You need to call out what kind of APIs are being used, whether it's REST or SOAP or bulk, what kind of authentication is being used, what kind of security, JOT bearer token flows, what are the OAuth flows that are being used, is it mutual TLS? Any security that you've assumed is being used between Salesforce and other systems, you need to call out. There's almost always, if not always, an element of cloud versus on-premise. So you need to highlight that. It's often well highlighted and seems to become a common pattern to use a firewall layer like you can see in this one. Others may put a box around the on-premise stuff. As long as you call it out, that's fine. A couple of other points that are optional. It's good to call out org-wide settings like single org, multi-currency, and that kind of stuff, multi-language, like you can see on this example. And avoid floating systems. So there's one on this one, in fact, at the top left. System that's not connected to anything. Kind of everything that's on your system landscape is going to have to interact with Salesforce somehow. It's unlikely. It's just a pure standalone solution. Moving on. Data model. So data model, as you would expect, is like an entity relationship diagram in more traditional sense, but there's some specific points you need to hit on. One, you need to touch on all of the objects that your solution needs to use, whether they're standard, custom, external. Call them out and call out the types and make it clear. Call out the relationships, really important. You show the difference between master, detail, and lookup, obviously very significant in the Salesforce ecosystem. Put a legend in, make it clear. Yes, you can vocalize over these things, but it's important to try and make it easy for the judges to digest what you've got, and don't make it hard for them to understand. The harder you make it for judges to understand, the more they're going to have to cover during Q&A. Don't assume that just because you're talking about it, that they'll commit it all to memory and they'll be satisfied. Make it easy for the judges. Things that you need to include. One, for each object, which user do you expect will own the records in that object? What are the org-wide defaults? Private, public read-write, public read. What are the volumes of data that you're anticipating? Your kind of order of magnitude in thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. And in addition to that, where the volumes are large, you need to call that out, large data volumes, so that you can talk to the steps you're taking to address the large data volumes and the issues that may come with that. So there's some of the key watch outs for your data model. Next, actors and licenses. We talked about this one already. This is more simple than the system landscape and data model, but just as important. Actors, we mean just the personas or the groups of users that you see mentioned in the scenario. It'll usually be quite easy to pick out most of them. They'll describe like salespeople, support people, field service agents, as well as external ones. Call them out. Call the type of license you're going to need. Very important for them. Really important. Equally important, call out why you've chosen that type of license. So it's no good just to say they're around Sales Cloud or Service Cloud. You need to give the reason and the justification, and it needs to be sound. So for example, you may need Service Cloud because you need omni-channel, or need case escalation rules, but have a reason and don't overinflate your license model, because you will get called out on that. Also, don't forget external users, customer community, community plus, partner user, whatever, partner community, whatever it may be, or experience cloud. And also, often forgotten, any app exchange license consideration. So where you're proposing new technologies, try and be aware of any app exchange components, what their licensing model is. You don't have to know the details and the inner workings, but understand if it's a per user license implication or an org-wide license, and how that licensing model works, because you may well get asked about it. Last of the artifacts that we're going to look at is the role hierarchy. Probably, well, something that we're all familiar with if you've worked in the Salesforce ecosystem. And again, not as complex as the data model or system landscape, but just as important. Not only is it important because it demonstrates how you're going to use the role hierarchy to provide certain types of record visibility, but you need to be mindful of any implications it may have. For example, sharing recalculations, objects with large data volumes where you may have record skew or owners owning lots of records that impact calculations and visibility, as well as where there are kind of specific security constraints that say a user must not see these kinds of records. You need to consider if your role hierarchy is going to conflict with that. And lastly, make sure you include external users as well that need to live in the role hierarchy. So customer community plus or partner community, where they can have external roles, include those two, very important. Okay, so we've looked at some of the core artifacts. Now let's get into the actual game and see if you can spot some of the common mistakes that we see. For this section, I've taken a number of real-life artifacts from mock review scenarios, from review scenarios that I've worked on over recent months, from some of my peers and colleagues, and these have obvious mistakes in them all. Let's see if you can spot those. First of all, let's take a look at a system landscape. For those, again, that are watching this not in real time, so if you're watching it in YouTube or watching a playback, feel free to pause and take more time to ponder. For those of you that are watching this live when we're broadcasting, have a quick look, see if there's anything that you can spot on there. There are a couple of obvious mistakes, so take a quick look, see if you can see anything, and then we'll take a look to see what the mistakes are. All right, did you spot any of them? So first of all, lots of systems all connected, but nothing describing how they're connected, what protocols, what APIs they're using, or how they're secured. really important. Second point, that there's no legend. So there's a number of colors used on here. There's the yellow boxes, the green boxes, but there's nothing describing what they are. Takes seconds to do, makes it easy for the judges to understand them without you having to explain. There's a floating system on there. So you can see Okta, the identity platform, is on there, but there's no connectivity to it. So it just leaves me wondering, why is it on there? How does it work? What's it connected to and how? You're going to get questioned on it and it doesn't look great. Lastly, not so obvious, there are no app exchange apps on here. It's pretty rare to have a solution that doesn't need at least one app exchange app. Not impossible, but it is rare. So if you have app exchange apps, make sure that you call them out on your system landscape. Just makes it that bit easier for the judges to soak up all that information. All right, how many did you spot? Hopefully all of them. Let's move on to another one. This time we're going to take a look at a data model. So remember the points we talked about before in the data model? Anything on here that you can see that doesn't look quite right or is missing? Have a look, pause it if you have that luxury. If not, have a quick look and we will move on. Did you spot any of these? So first of all, again, there's no legend. You know, I look at this and I'm kind of wondering, what does the P mean? It means private. In this case, it's the org-wide default. CBP means parent, control by parent, but it's not very clear. It requires me to kind of think about it. Just put a legend on it. It's going to take seconds, takes away any of that ambiguity in those questions. There's lots of relationships, which are master detail and lookup. I could probably infer it if I look at the standard ones and figure it out, but it's not very clear. And again, standard versus custom. I don't know if these objects are standard, if they're custom. It's just not clear to me. Large data volumes. We've got some volumes on there, which is good, but we haven't specifically called out the large data volumes. So again, it's a small point, but it's easy to do. And lastly, we don't call out the record owners. So remember to include record owners, very important. Last one that we're going to take a look at, actors and licenses. So take a look at this one, see if there's anything that you can spot, anything that doesn't look quite right or anything that's missing based on what we talked about before. Remember, these are the people that will be using your system, the licenses you need to specify for them. Let's take a look. All right, so first one, we're missing the justification, really important. And this isn't just actors and licenses, anything in your solution, you have to propose what your solution is and then why you're proposing it, why you're using it. Really important with the licenses. So what's your justification? And secondly, slightly more nuanced, we called out community licenses, but we didn't say what kind of community. Custom community plus. So make sure you're specific with the license types. All right, let's wrap up. So what did we talk about today? First of all, we had a run through of the Certified Technical Architect pathway, what kind of things you have to do to achieve Certified Technical Architect, the preparation, the study, the certifications, and some of the offerings from Salesforce that you can use. Secondly, we looked at the review board in detail. You know, this is the real guts of what you need to do to achieve your Certified Technical Architect status, is to take the review board and pass it. This is the pinnacle. So we looked at that, the three components of it, how that works, and how you need to prepare for that. Mock reviews are key. Time management is critical. Do not forget the time management element of that. Lastly, we looked at a bunch of different artifacts that get produced as part of the mock review or the final review. And you know, these are the bread and butter of any architect that you will produce in your day job. But we looked at how we produce them under time pressure, what approaches we have, and how we can create those. And remember, the time pressure is critical. So practice that. Practice is key. And on that, I would like to conclude my my presentation today. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that it will help you on your CTA journey if you've already started, or maybe even inspire you to make a start and achieve that coveted certification. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.